Oh, so we're welcoming today Cynde McInnis, author of our Responsible Whale Watching Guides course, and somebody that I have huge respect for as one of the most experienced naturalists working out on whale watching boats in the industry across the world. Welcome, Cynde.
Thank you.
Now, we're telling stories on whale whisperers today, and it'd be lovely to hear one of yours. I believe you might be telling us about something called breaching.
Yeah. So breaching is, when a whale jumps headfirst out of the water. So they do a couple different things. A breach is head first. A tail breach is kind of tail first. They'll do a lob tail where they slap their tails and flipper slap. Those are the main behaviors that they do. And it's probably one of the most commonly asked questions. Are the whales going to breach? And we don't know. Um, but sometimes people will ask me, well, how often do you see breaching? And so what I tell them is in 2001, I remember this because a friend of mine had come out for 3 weeks and she came out on every single trip. She was coming out as an intern and she saw breaching on every single trip. We do 2 a day, except for 2. That whole time, there were just loads of whales around. I think when there's more whales, there's more breaching. And so she just saw it a lot that year. Fast forward a couple of years, 2004 was probably one of the slowest years we've had in terms of humpbacks, especially. Um, I worked 120 trips that year. And I had maybe 2 or 3 where we had a little lob tailing, a little flipper slapping. But I also got married that year. And so I wanted to get married and have a rehearsal dinner whale watch. And so we went out, all my family and friends were on the boat. And that was the one and only breach that I saw that entire year. And the whale jumped out of the water and my boss looked at me and he was like, they're blessing you. That's your breach for getting married. But I mean, just, you never know how often they're going to do it.
That's all. I mean, that's like, do you remember that? Because you'll have seen thousands of breaches over
I
the time you've been. Do you
so
remember that specific one?
Yep, yep, exactly where it was in relation to the boat. I don't know who it was. We didn't get a lot of fluke shots that day, and so I'm not sure which whale it was. In fact, I was
Okay.
looking through pictures last night because I'm doing a throwback video of this year. And I found a picture. I was like, oh, I wonder if that was the guy that breached that day.
So cool. That is
Yeah.
so cool. I mean, when I take my family or close friends on a whale watching trip, I obviously always big it up. And then it's nearly always disappointing. Like I don't get even an average whale watch, and they're kind of like, "Oh, it was great," and you're thinking, "No, it could have been so much more amazing."
I think my kids still have not seen breaching. My kids are 12
Really?
and 14, and they have not gone out and seen a whale breach over and over or anything like that. They finally, I think 2 years ago, had a really good, one of those trips where we see multiple species and lots of feeding. And my son was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I was like, see, it is really amazing when you get to see a lot of cool stuff.
No, that's so awesome. Seeing a whale lift its body clear of the water, and if it's a humpback, it could be 50 tons or something crazy in
Yeah,
weight, and just the sheer power required to do that. I mean, it's
it's amazing.
breathtaking, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's amazing. And when they do, I always think about like, I remember one trip, we usually spend an hour on whales. The whale was breaching as we were approaching, breached the entire time we were out there. And as we were leaving, it was still breaching. I was like, why is it breaching for an hour? I mean, that's to
Wow.
me like those 50-mile runs or 100-mile runs. You know what I mean? Like I can't imagine the energy that it takes to do that.
It's a breaching marathon.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Why? I am the customer now, Cynde. So why do these whales actually breach?
Okay, so sometimes it could be to slough off dead skin cells, barnacles, that sort of thing.
Okay.
Um, it's definitely probably a communication thing. Actually, there was a really cool trip that we had years ago also. So where we are, there's lots of boats, so all the captains talk to each other. And it was this really quiet day. None of the whales were doing anything. And we were watching 2 whales, and all of a sudden they breached. And so our captain got on the radio and was like, oh, the whales just breached. And 3 miles away, another captain chimed in that his whales had just breached. And 10 miles away, then another captain said his whales had just breached. Oh, I'm getting chills even talking about that.
Wow.
So it could be that they're communicating with each other, right? And I've had a couple trips where um, especially right before big storms come in, like hurricanes, you look and every whale is doing something at the surface. And do you know what? Another time that I saw this, getting chills again, was September 10th, 2001, the day before 9/11. The whales were maybe agitated is my word that I'm putting on it because of what happened, but anytime there were probably 25 to 30 whales, and at any moment there were 5 splashes, tail breaches, lob tails, flipper slapping breaches, just activity among all the whales all the time. It was so interesting. I wonder if there wasn't something, I don't know, something going on that they could sense, you know.
Something in the air or in the
wild.
water.
Yeah, it was wild.
Really? Wow,
Yep.
that's amazing. So, so communication could be a thing.
Communication. Dominance is another interesting thing. So typically humpbacks are solitary, and when we see 2 whales together, there typically is a dominant whale and a subordinate whale. So the dominant whale is always diving first, and I've had a couple trips where I feel like the subordinate whale's like, you know, hey, I want to be the dominant whale, and the dominant whale's like, no, and then the subordinate whale's like, yes. And then they either, you know, it's a couple like exchanges and they go back to normal, or they separate. So there's some sort of, I mean, that's communication also, but it seems like communication around dominance, or I don't know, maybe they're just upset with each other, something.
Very interesting. Very, very
You know,
interesting.
the other thing is that often we kind of wonder if it doesn't help them adjust their digestive system, because a lot of times we'll see them poop after they breach, and so we wonder if it doesn't help move things around somehow.
Really? Bit of indigestion, or a little bit maybe
Little gas.
constipated. A bit like how a cormorant has his wings out after a heavy fish meal, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Outrageous. I mean, I personally, when I've had a really heavy meal, the last thing I want to do is jump about a
Oh
lot.
my God, I know, right?
Cynde, I love it. I mean, they're incredible experiences, and what is great about having all of that, you know, field experience really that you've got is that and it shows the value of guiding for me in a way, is that, you know, we've got the science and we've got the knowledge that we have, and we know that we've literally just scratched the surface with whales, to use a sort of a bit of a pun, because there's so much that we don't know about cetaceans. But when you combine the science with all of that field experience, you know, it actually adds to our current knowledge. And when you talk to us about things like, you know, skippers miles apart just suddenly communicating, there are whales breaching, we know that means there has to be some sort of connection, you know, between the animals. I think those sort of things are wonderful, aren't they? Wonderful things to learn, and to be able to pass on to those people who are experiencing it.
And those are stories that I tell. You know, if we see animals breaching and people ask me why, then that's a story that I tell from my past experience that I then share with passengers to explain whatever it is that we're seeing.
And that, I think that for me, you're hitting upon the number one thing that makes a really great guide, and that's the ability to tell stories. And people learn best, I think, through listening to stories. And if you can tell, you know, for example, a new piece of scientific information through a story and through experience, then it's so much more compelling for people.
Definitely is.
Yeah, wonderful. Cynde, thank you so much for joining us on Whale Whisperers. We will be seeing you later in the week for more talks.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me, Dylan.
Thanks so much, Cynde.